Hey everyone, Nick here from Talking Guardboard, and today I'm going to be doing a video on my top 5 Dudes on a Map board games. So first, what is a Dudes on a Map game? Well, that is rather a subjective term. When you go to Board Game Geek, I don't think they have even a category called Dudes on a Map game to search under. I think Dudes on a Map probably is a collection of a lot of the other terms that you can search under, including area control, war game, combat. I'm sure there's a few other terms that you could correlate to a Dudes on a Map game. So for the purpose of this video, I'll define what I think at least is a Dudes on a Map game. And I would say the game has to check off a few criteria. First of all, the game is played on a board or map that depicts a relatively large geographic area. What's relatively large? Well, something that you wouldn't be able to traverse in real life in over a day. Specifically at least a full country or the world or a galaxy, a planet, something with a lot of scope. And that's the first thing I would say a Dudes on a Map game has to have. Second, and maybe most important, are the dudes themselves. So each player in that game is going to have units that have some sort of combat value associated with them that you're using to take over other parts of this large geographic map. And then third, a Dudes on a Map game should have some sort of combat system. Now, typically when I think of a Dudes on a Map game, I'm thinking of dice for the combat mechanics. Although you probably could use others. Of course, there's other systems available that you could use to resolve combat. But in my mind, when I think of Dudes on a Map game, I'm thinking of course, dice combat. And with that said, the perfect example of a Dudes on a Map game is Risk. And with that said, Risk itself, I think Risk gets a bad rap when it's talked about because it's such a watered down game compared to what we know today for what a Dudes on a Map game can be. But keep in mind, Risk was developed in the 50s. So this game is extremely old, and the fact that they still are using that, able to market Risk games today is impressive and worthy of recognition. So if anything, get mad at the people that want to play Risk and not mad at the game itself. But definitely Risk is kind of then a good benchmark as to what I'm considering or visioning as a Dudes on a Map game. With that said, I do think the games I'll be talking about would generally be agreed upon as Dudes on a Map games, but what you may or may not agree with is how I rank them and my list altogether. So with that said, I encourage you to put your thoughts in the comments below as whether you agree with the games that I've included in this list or not. And if not, what games would you have put in your top 5 list of Dudes on a Map game? So without further ado, let's get started. So before I start talking about my actual top 5 Dudes on a Map board games, I do want to start with an honorable mention, and that is 1775 Rebellion from Academy Games. Now, the reason why this didn't make my top 5 is simply because it's not complex enough for me. The games that are in my top 5 have a lot of depth to them, a lot more depth than I would say 1775 Rebellion does. And for that reason, I just couldn't get myself to put this into the top 5. But I do think this game is deserving of an honorable mention because I do feel that it serves as one of the best, if not the best, gateway games into the Dudes on a Map genre of board gaming. As I mentioned in the beginning of this video, I consider Risk as kind of the benchmark for the Dudes on a Map genre. And 1775 Rebellion takes Risk one step up. So if you're kind of new to this hobby and have played Risk and are comfortable with playing Risk, then playing this game, 1775 Rebellion, is probably something that you'd be able to do and hopefully enjoy, because what's nice about 1775 Rebellion is essentially actually adds theme. Unlike in Risk, where you could almost say it's an abstract conquest control game just because there's really no, it doesn't matter what faction you're starting as or what countries you're controlling. Nothing really matters in that game. In 1775, you actually do now have theme implemented into the game. For example, each side's units have different die roll results. So, for example, if you're playing as the British player, your redcoats are more likely to roll a hit or a command decision and will never flee. Whereas if you're the militia, you're more likely to flee, less likely to hit, and less likely to have the command decision that the British soldiers would have, to kind of illustrate that the British redcoats were more organized and trained than the U.S. militia. So right there, it's not a complicated means of adding theme. In fact, the players almost don't have to understand that if you don't want to, because you're just rolling the dice at the end of the day. But the theme is there, and it, actually takes from history. Also, of course, the map itself is historical in design, and you're, of course, trying to take over the actual strategic cities that were important back in 1775. But also, theme is implemented via the card system in Rebellion. So, British player, for example, will have more ship movement cards than the U.S. player, and then there's historic event cards added to the game, such as how the French get added into the game when they, I think, land in Rhode Island, for example. You can play a card and then you have, boom, 6 French troops. So with that said, I think the theme can draw in a lot of players alone because, of course, it's a big part of the nation's history in the United States. But also, like I said, it's not that much more complicated than Risk. So for that reason, I really wanted to give this game an honorable mention because of what it's really doing for the hobby as a whole, for wargaming as a whole. All right, so my number 5 spot for top Dudes on a Map board game belongs to, can I get a drum roll, please? Got them for Christmas from my dad, first time I had the opportunity to use them. But number 5 spot goes to Axis and Allies by Avalon Hill Games. So, first of all, I'm sure a lot of people assumed, a lot of people watching this video assumed that this game would show up sooner or later. You were right. It definitely is a game that I feel is deserving of a top spot in my top 5 Dudes on a Map board games. So why exactly do I feel that way? Well, again, I hate to continue to compare it to Risk, but Risk was the first Dudes on a Map game that I played growing up as a kid. And one of the things that I think bothered me the most about playing Risk was the fact that the infantry and the cavalry and the artillery were all essentially the same. They were just served the figures were just for denomination purposes. Well, in Axis and Allies, the units actually do matter. A infantry unit performs differently than an artillery unit, which performs differently than a tank unit in Axis and Allies. And that right there really made me interested in this game. And not just the fact you now had only land units, but now you had naval units and air units. And also amongst the air and naval units, you had different types that had different idiosyncrasies about them. So the unit variety alone in Axis and Allies was something that was really, a breath of fresh air relative to Risk. Now, with that said, the other aspect about Axis and Allies that I really appreciated, again, that didn't really exist in Risk, was an economy system. So in Risk, your economy was essentially these cards you were getting, and it was just so abstracted. Like, I'm getting cards and I'm trying to make a random set that for some reason gets me reinforcements. Well, in Axis and Allies, you actually have production factories that are giving you commerce and production values that then you can turn into actual units, and then the units actually have different costs associated with them. So again, right there are another reason why I really enjoyed what Axis and Allies was doing as a Dudes on a Map game. But also, growing up, I played a lot of RTS games on my computer. And in pretty much every RTS game, you have some sort of economy system where you're making money or gold or some sort of resource and turning that into units and buildings. So to see that implemented in a board game was something that was very interesting to me. With that said, those are kind of my main reasons why it's on the list. Now, why isn't it higher than my top 5 spot? Well, the games that I'll be talking about here soon, I think take the genre of Dudes on a Map a step further. And have a little more creativity to them than what Axis and Allies does, because at the end of the day, Axis and Allies is simply still just an area control game with more fluff and details and complexity than Risk. So still deserving of the top 5 spot, but falls short of anything higher because, like I said, It really just kind of ends right there in terms of what you're trying to do in the game. Axis and Allies, my number 5, Dudes on a Map board game. So my number 4 Dudes on a Map board game is... drum roll. Actually, I don't physically own this game, but it is Dune by Gale Force 9. I've actually had the opportunity of playing Dune on Tabletop Simulator via a bunch of people on the Dune Discord channel. So if you're interested, definitely check that out. They have a very strong following. But Dune, the board game, was originally published back in the 70s or 80s. I'm not sure the original publishing company, but then a few years ago, it was republished by Gale Force 9. So the version that I'm thinking of is the Gale Force 9 version. However, I do believe the Gale Force 9 version is more or less identical to the original, except maybe the Gale Force 9 splits rules between a basic game and an advanced game. Nonetheless, first thing I want to mention is, of course, this is a game based on the Dune IP. If you're not familiar with the Dune IP, I'm not going to bother trying to break down what Dune's all about. It's a really big universe. It's not no different than the Star Wars or Star Trek or Game of Thrones. So maybe do a quick Wikipedia search if you're curious. With that said, my background of the Dune IP started when I was maybe 7 or 8 years old playing the Dune 2000 PC game, which was an RTS strategy game set in the Dune universe. And I thought the Dune, theme seemed interesting. I definitely enjoyed playing that computer game. After playing that game, I never really dug deeper into the Dune IP. I never read the books, for example. I don't think I've ever seen the full feature-length film either. So I can't say that I'm in love with the theme Dune, but I'm also not going to say I dislike the theme. And I'm saying that just to give you better context for me putting this game on my list of best Dudes on a Map board game. I'm saying that even though I'm not obsessed with this theme, I'm still saying it deserves a spot on the top Dudes on a Map board games. So why is that? Well, there's a lot of reasons. I think one big reason is I really appreciate the economic system in Dune. In the IP of Dune, spice is essentially the currency used in that world, and it's extremely important. It's really what the whole storyline of Dune is all about, is all these factions trying to fight over spice. And that's no different than the board game. But the way that spice is incorporated into the board game, I thought was very elegantly done. As is mentioned in the book, spice is everything, and those who control the spice control the world, or whatever the exact quote was, and that's true in the board game. You need spice if you want to bring your troops back to life. You need spice if you want to bid on treachery cards, which will help you in future combats, and you need spice if you want to try to bribe your other players to do things for you and that sort of thing. So it's a much more rigorous and strategic economic system than what was used in Axis and Allies, for example. Additionally, I appreciate the fact that generals or leaders were implemented in Dune, because that just adds another layer of strategy to understand when you should use which leaders for which combat. And the fact that the game also has this whole traitor dynamic where you might have a leader that you're using in a combat that is actually a traitor unbeknownst to you, and the player you're fighting against has a traitor card for your leader, which they can then play, and that makes you automatically lose that combat. So that is a very interesting dynamic that's always in the background. Maybe there's reasons why you may for sure know one of your leaders isn't a traitor, but that's always a risk, it seems, when you're fighting in this game. With that said, the combat in this game is very unique and differentiated from most Dudes on the Map board games, because, like I said at the beginning of this video, typically when I think of a Dude on a Map board game, I feel combat is resolved by a simple dice roll. Each side rolls their dice and then you count up hits. Nothing wrong with that, and I actually kind of appreciate that combat system, but in Dune, you're using a combat wheel. And in Dune, with your combat wheel, you actually get to pick the number that you're essentially rolling, which is based on the number of units you have in the fight. So if you have 9 units, you can bid up to 9, or spin your wheel up to 9. The downside is that's how many soldiers you're going to end up losing in that fight. With that said, the higher number wins. So you can already see there's strategy right there. You bid a ton of units to guarantee that you're going to beat your opponent. Or do you try to trick them and only bid a little in the hopes that, or, put out a little in the hopes that they think that you're going to, spend all your units, and then they end up losing a bunch. In addition then just to the combat wheel, you also have these treachery cards that you're using in combats that can target enemy leaders that are fighting to try to take them out. So what I hope you're picking up on is this game is extremely, extremely deterministic. There's almost no luck factor in this game. The better player should win a game of Dune, and that's what makes it, I think, very interesting. Of a game in general, but also for as a dudes on a map board game, because I don't think strategy is as valued in a game as much as in Dune. There's so many elements at play that an experienced player is simply going to be able to do better than non-experienced players. So with that said, that may be then kind of a downside to the game of Dune. If you're playing with someone new and you've been playing the game many times, it's going to take a while for that new player to really be able to compete then with you. And that's even if using the basic rules. The game, like I said, comes with a basic rule set and an advanced rule set. The basic rule set, in my mind, is complex enough. The advanced rules just make a relatively detailed and intricate game that much more detailed and intricate. Another reason why it's probably not higher on my list than 4 is the player count itself. I feel in order to truly have the full Dune experience, you need 6 players, because that means you have the abilities of all 6 factions in play in the game. And since all factions' abilities usually impact some element of the game, whether you want it to or not, that gives you then, like I said, the full Dune experience. With that said, though, there are so many reasons why this game definitely deserves this number 4 spot. Alright, so my number 3 Dudes on a Map board game is... drum roll, please. War of the Ring, 2nd edition by Ares Games. So if you weren't aware of this already, or if you haven't been able to figure this out by the title or the artwork on this box, this is a game based on the Lord of the Rings trilogy by J.R.R. Tolkien. As a quick disclaimer, I myself definitely am a big fan of the Lord of the Rings universe. I've seen the trilogy movies several times each. I've played a lot of Lord of the Rings video games growing up. Definitely not going to say I'm the biggest Lord of the Rings fan there ever was, but anything Lord of the Rings themed is automatically going to get my interest. Now, with that said, I still think that this game is deserving to be on anyone's top Dudes on a Map board game list, regardless of their affection for the theme, just because this is still a solidly designed game, Lord of the Rings theme or not. I think strong reason why I like this game so much is the well-balanced asymmetry between the 2 key factions. As a shadow player, you start the game with just an overwhelming amount of forces on the map, and the Free People's player is probably like looking at the board like, oh my gosh, with wide eyes, like how the heck am I supposed to win this game? But at the end of the day, it's I feel like it's still 50-50 chance in terms of who's going to be the winning player. It's not like one player actually has an advantage over the other at the start of the game. Although force-wise, the shadow player definitely has more dudes on the map, so to speak. And that's partly due to the fact that, even though you have a lot of shadow forces, the shadow player has to take over these key fortresses, such as Helm's Deep, of course, or Minas Tirith. And the rules of the game make it very difficult for a force to simply take over a fortress. And a very small force can effectively defend a fortress against an overwhelmingly large enemy force. So I really appreciate that part of the game, that they were able to balance the sides so well. Along that same vein, each side has their own heroes introduced in the game, or villains or whatever, that you can use. And I find that a lot of fun to be able to fight with Aragorn, or Gimli or Legolas. Now, what also I appreciate about this game is it's almost like 2 games in one. You have this strategic part of the game where you're moving your forces from area to area across Middle-earth, trying to take over key locations or defend your key locations. Meanwhile, you also have the Fellowship trying to move space by space all the way to Mount Doom to deposit the ring into the volcano. And for that part of the game, the shadow player is trying to prevent that from happening. So this all boils down to the dice action selection system in the game. On your turn, each faction has their own unique set of dice that they will be rolling that then will essentially determine what kind of actions you can take. As a shadow player, one of those actions may be to try to focus your attention on Frodo and the Fellowship and try to slow down their progress to Mount Doom. But if you make that decision, that means you have less dice to try to use for your strategic initiatives and moving your forces from space to space, which you can't ignore because, like I said, you're trying to eventually take over these key fortresses of the Free People's player. So you need to balance, both sides of the game. If you focus too much on the Fellowship, you're going to have your forces all the way back in Mount, by Isengard or wherever, and not in strategically important locations. But if you focus all your effort on trying to move your orcs and Uruk-hai down to the various fortresses, then then the Free People's player is going to have no problem getting Frodo all the way to Mount Doom. And same for the Free People's player, having to balance how you want to move your forces, what few forces you have around the map, and then balancing that with your efforts and attention to moving Frodo to Mount Doom. And there's also a balancing act in how you use the Fellowship themselves. Do you want to take Aragorn away from the Fellowship, away from Frodo, and put him in a battle that you find is going to be really important because Aragorn's going to, be a big combat benefit to you? Or do you want him to stay with Frodo as he progresses all the way to Mount Doom to protect Frodo's efforts? So those are the kind of key decisions you'll be having to make. Another thing that I really appreciate about this game is this political track that's included. So at the start of the game, not all the Free People's factions are actively fighting on the Free People's side. They're essentially neutral. So like the elves and dwarves, at the very least, I believe, are neutral factions. And during the game, as the Free People's player, you're going to do whatever it takes to get them to try to start fighting for you because you won't need as many forces as you can possibly get. It's not like a huge part of the game, but it's a very important part of the game because, like I just said, as a Free People's player, you need those extra troops. And what's also unique that I didn't mention about combat is when the Free People's ever loses a unit, whether it's a human unit, a dwarf, or an elf, they're back in the box. It's not just back in your tray where you can bring them back to life. They're gone. They're good as dead. Whereas with the Shadow player, when they lose their forces, they just get put back in their pool and are able to bring them back in the future, and they don't have a finite amount of resources, which again, I think draws a lot from the theme, the Lord of the Rings theme, but in practice, it's just makes you as a Free People's player, each little figure on the map is so meaningful, and as long as they can at least take out a few orcs before they die, that can be a major accomplishment that really could change the tide of a whole entire battle. And anyway, there's a few more things I probably could say about this game, including the card play dynamics that are incorporated into this game, since each player will have a hand of cards that they can use for a variety of purposes. But hopefully you can understand why this game is so deserving of a top spot in any Dudes on a Map board game list. Just because it's such a huge game with so much going on, a lot of strategy, and like I said, two very asymmetric factions that each have their own unique set of challenges in front of them in order to try to win the game. So with that said, my number 3 Dudes on a Map board game is War of the Ring by Ares Games. All right, my number 2 Dudes on a Map board game is, drumroll please, Star Wars Rebellion from Fantasy Flight Games. Now, I think a lot of people would consider this as Star Wars in a box, and I would have to agree. This definitely is basically Star Wars in a box. This game pulls from the original trilogy Star Wars movies, so on 4, 5, and 6, and pits two players against each other, one controlling the forces of the Galactic Empire, one controlling the forces of the Rebellion. As the Galactic Empire player, you're simply trying to find the planet where the secret rebel base is located and destroying it. As a rebel player, you're simply trying to delay that from as long as possible. There's a lot of reasons why I think this game is worthy of being on a top Dudes on a Map board game list. First of all, I really appreciate just the high-level objectives not being simply area control, but being a little unique. Finding the rebel base and preventing the rebel base from being found. It just is different from a lot of the other area control Dudes on a Map games. So I like that aspect of this game. And I, much like in War of the Ring, I really appreciate the asymmetry of the factions, and that playing each faction has a completely different feel to it. As the Galactic Empire player, you start with an overwhelming number of forces on the map. As the Rebellion player, you don't. Yet that, of course, doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to lose as a Rebellion player, because the objective isn't simply a military victories. It's just delaying, like I said, the discovery of your secret base. Really appreciate how heroes are implemented in this game. So when you start the game, each side will have 4 characters at their disposal, and there's 2 essentially methods of using your characters. One is for operations, which mean like moving your units around the strategic map, and for attacking purposes. And then also the other means is for missions. So you can use your characters to successfully succeed missions. And to do that, each player will have their own set of mission cards unique to your own faction. Whenever you want to play a mission card, you first have to then also pick a character that can complete that mission for you. Also, you can use your characters simply to defend against your opponent, whether defending against an attack from your opponent, or defending your opponent from completing one of those missions. So the whole dynamic with how characters are used is very well done, in my opinion. Do you want Luke Skywalker to try to, accomplish some mission that you feel is very critical? Or do you think Luke Skywalker should be part of a battle that you have upcoming that you really want to use his combat value for? And as time goes on, you get to add more characters to your character pool. Like I said, you start with 4, but after every 2 rounds, I think 1 gets added until you have each side has a total of 8 characters. And so I like that natural kind of progression then, in terms of you only have 4 really things to do when you start the game, and then at the end of the game you'll have a lot more options at your disposal with 8 total characters. The combat in the system is elegant. There's a lot of different unit types included, and each have their own slightly different stats. There's like 2 colored dice that combat units roll. And the one thing that I haven't talked about is the economic system in this game. That also isn't overly complicated. Essentially, if you're in control of a planet, that planet provides a certain number of resource points which directly relate to a unit, essentially. In some cases, you might have a choice between 2 different types of units that a planet could make, but at the end of the day, a planet basically can be used to make a specific type of unit, and it's that simple. And then there's a production track as well. Some units can be made by the beginning of the next turn. Some units will take 3 turns before it's ready to be put on the map. With all that said, there's a lot going on in this game. It's a highly thematic game. So if you're not a big fan of the Star Wars universe, I do think it would probably not be then a game that's going to excite you as much as someone like myself who is a big fan of Star Wars. So definitely keep that in mind. I'm still putting it at the number 2 spot on my best Dudes on a Map board game list, just because I still think it's a great game aside from the Star Wars theme. But does the Star Wars theme impact my decision a little bit? Probably. But hey, it's my list. So with that said, Star Wars Rebellion, number 2 on my list for top Dudes on a Map board games. All right, so the number 1 spot in my top Dudes on a Map board game list belongs to, drumroll please, Actually, it's another game that I don't physically own a copy of, but that is Twilight Imperium 4th edition. I have a good friend that owns this game, and this is a game that you definitely don't need to buy a copy of if you already have someone in your game group that owns it, because it is a game that has so much scale to it and usually requires 6 players to play anyway. So unless you have a family of 6 that will play with you, I don't think there's a need to actually have it in your collection. But with that said, Twilight Imperium 4th edition probably is a game that really doesn't need any introduction. I do think it's one of the more well-known games in our hobby, because it's been around now for a while and always seems to be at the top of any Board Game Geek list. It's definitely probably the quintessential 4X strategy game, and in my case also the number one Dudes on a Map board game. And I think it deserves that spot it deserves that recognition for a variety of reasons. Now, for me specifically, or for me personally, one of the reasons why I definitely find this game deserving of a top spot is due to the fact you get 16 factions in the base game of the 4th edition. Now, if the 3rd edition, yes, I know that's not the case, but hey, we're on the 4th edition now, so I'm going to talk about 4th edition. And in the 4th edition, you get 16 factions. 16 factions in the base box. And each faction is highly asymmetric. I'm not talking that each faction has one unique ability and that's it. That's how they're different from each other. I'm talking they have different abilities. They have different flagships. They have different unit statistics potentially. They have different technologies potentially. They have a different starting planet. And some even have a few other elements that make them differentiated from the other factions in the game. And for the most part, I would say they're also very well balanced. Now, yes, there are lists out there that will tell you what are the best factions in the game and what are the worst factions in the game. But I feel that if you're all starting players, it really is not going to matter so much. Sure, maybe even for starting players, some factions are considered easier to win with than others. But if you're starting players and you don't really know what you're doing, I don't think that matters, or it would matter as much as it does, of course, if you are all experienced players and do know the factions a little better and their limitations and their strengths. But with that said, all I'm trying to say is 16 factions in the base game that are all very different, and that alone then really encourages you to want to try to play the game over and over again, just to experience what each of these different factions offer. Now, another reason why I personally like this game, and I'm sure a lot of others appreciate this aspect about the game too, is the winning conditions, which are based on simply achieving 10 objective points. And maybe it's 10 for a normal game and 8 for a short game, or I can't remember exactly the objective point difference depending on the type of game you're playing. But for simplicity, we'll say you need to achieve 10 objective points to win. Now, how you achieve those objective points is essentially doing what the various objective cards that are at your disposal say. Some objective cards are going to be militaristic in nature, such as taking over planets or whatever. Some are going to be technology related and simply tell you that you need to research certain technologies to get that objective. Some are going to be commerce related, and simply you need to have a certain amount of trade that you can spend in order to get that objective. And that's why this game, I think, is so appealing, is it allows for so many ways to play the game, and no way is necessarily better or worse than another way of playing the game. So if you want to simply focus on your own area of the galaxy and focus on, researching as much technology as you possibly can, you can do that and you could win that way. If you want to focus on expanding your territorial control as much as possible and focus more just on combat-oriented behavior, you can do that as well, and you could win that way too. Or you can take a middle path, or you can focus a lot on commerce and trying to just be a trade lord and trade away, commerce to do as much as you possibly can that way and achieve a victory. So it's true that the faction you pick will probably influence the direction you're going to take, but I also don't think a faction has to be connected to a certain technology path by any means. You always feel like you kind of have hope in this game of winning, because getting objectives it's a laborious process to get an objective point. It's not something that's easy to do, and you need 10 of them. And sure, some players may quickly rise to the top, but then that player's a target for the other players. So even if you're starting off slow, if no one's going to care about you then, and so then you're able to maybe focus on getting better while the top player is the target of everyone else. And then if that top player is getting beat up on, they're going to probably start to be less effective, and you might have the opportunity to catch up from behind. So and attacking players is not something that's easy to do. That is very resource intensive. So it's hard to get eliminated early in this game, and I feel like to the very end, everyone is more or less in the running to some degree. Now, a big part of this game is the negotiation. I don't know of a game that prioritizes the value of negotiation as much as Twilight Imperium 4th edition. Yes, as I mentioned in Dune, there is negotiation in that game as well, but not to the level that there is in Twilight Imperium. There's just a lot more going on in Twilight Imperium that you can, leverage with negotiation, and that's a big part of the game. I really appreciate the combat system in the game. I like how each type of unit has its own characteristics and movement values and attack values, and you can, get technologies to improve your ships. You have these cool flagships that you can move around. You have defense cannons that can defend your planets, and then you have, to successfully take over a planet, you need to assault the planet by first normally winning an airship. Oh, did I mention Mechatral Rex in the center of the board that players are trying to try to capture to gain influence, which then can be used for voting on different laws that can greatly impact your strategy depending on what the law is. So having influence is an important resource, but then you still have just the regular trade resource that's important for raising up an army that you may need to take over the areas you need to take over, or for at the very least defending your home planets from invasion. Wow, there is just so much to talk about this game on this game, and that's why it's deserving of the #1 spot in my list of best dudes on a map board games. I mean, I could go on and on and on about why this game is an amazing design. There's so many aspects to it that you just think, wow, that was well done. Man, it's hard for me not to smile when I talk about this game, because I think of my own play experiences of this game, and as much of a tiring experience they've been fantastic experiences. And I'm saying, like, we probably played 20 hours straight, and it was largely due to the fact our group simply was obsessed with negotiating every little aspect of the game. But the point is, the fact that we played a game basically 20 hours and still had a fun time, that tells you how great a game Twilight Imperium is. And I know other people who play this game definitely probably play on average at least 5 hours at a time, if not more. And people are okay with that because the Twilight Imperium is that good. Because even though it's a very laborious and time-consuming game, it's that fun and that engaging that it's worth sacrificing the time to play it. So, for all those reasons, and all of the reasons that I probably forgot to mention, that's why I have Twilight Imperium 4th edition as the #1 Dudes on a Map board game. Well, with that said, I'm Nick from Talking Cardboard. Thanks so much for watching this video. Again, please comment below your thoughts and feelings about my list of top 5 Dudes on a Map games. Do you agree with my list? Do you disagree? I'd love to hear your top 5 list. And with that said, hope to see you guys again soon. Thanks, guys.